A History, Part 3, The 11th Hour. The sky boiled with an angry mix of blue-gray clouds that threatened yet another downpour of apocalyptic acid rain. A warning siren rang out throughout the region, and the few Zicadian spiders still topside hurriedly scuttled their way towards the nearest subterranean shelters. At the Grand Palace of Gathering, a jointly owned facility representing the supernest Ximenia, of which Nest Zitalia and Nest Ximagentia were both members, a crisis meeting of all the major celestial queens had been urgently convened. Within the main auditorium of the palace stood Zimodian 97, a now somewhat elderly seven-brained Zihari from Nest Zitalia and senior scientist of global climatology, who in collaboration with several other prominent experts had petitioned the queens for a meeting. In accordance with the laws that governed the powers of Shihari senior science officers, such a gathering could neither be ignored or denied a fair hearing. Cut against the background of the sirens, Zimodian could not help but feel that the very planet itself was desperately crying out for attention. He supposed this kind of charged arachnopomorphic thinking was likely coming from brain number 5, long proven by his neurologist brethren to be the source of his most powerful emotions. Yet this was hardly the time to allow unconstrained sentiment to take control of his senses. As a senior Shihari scientist, he was deeply wedded to the scientific method, and that method was cold and unfeeling. It dealt only with facts and figures, and those facts were his most valuable ally, but only if he could wield them with ice water running through his veins. An overinflated sense of moral outrage would only serve to alienate the audience, and that was the last thing he needed right now. The facts alone would tell the story that needed to be told. A story about the future of their species, or, were they to continue down their current path, the complete and utter lack of it. If they had one thing going for them at least, it was the Celestial queens, some of whom were pushing nearly 7,000 years old, cared about the prospects of the Zicadian future at least as much as they cared about the traditions of the past. He needed the queens to recognize the terrible gravity of the situation at hand. Just because their current way of life had served them perfectly well for countless millennia, it didn't necessarily follow it would continue to do so indefinitely into the future. Simply put, complacent inertia was no longer an option. The elderly scientist now stood at a lectern, with a giant holographic display located directly behind him. It currently glowed with randomly generated ribbons, hypnotically dancing through the air. The front row of seating tables were reserved for the celestial queens, who jointly governed the supernest, with the last couple of representatives settling themselves in after having just arrived. A little further back was located the public gallery, where lines of general seating lay stacked up upon a steeply sloping embankment. This area was mainly occupied by a mixture of young Xylinian queens from smaller member nests, a few Shihari intellectual philosophers, specialists and experts from a wide range of differing fields, and various other high-ranking Shimatiri dignitaries. The Great Hall was now abuzz with the quiet chatter of curious anticipation. Zimodian took a final sweeping glance across the expanse of gathered arachnids, steadied his nerves, and waved the holographic display into life. An image of Exanos Prime lit up the stage, and the virtual camera quickly zoomed out from the brilliantly lit star, smoothly sweeping its way past the rocky inner planets before dramatically shooting past the gas giant Zelantia. It continued to blast its way through the seemingly endless void of space until finally coming to rest at the outer asteroid belt. At such a great distance, even the sun itself had faded into little more than a pallid dot of shimmering light. Having apparently made its point about their place in the universe, the camera roared its way back to Zicadia and then began to obediently orbit the planet. The audience was now treated to a captivating historical rendering of Zicadia in all of its holographic glory. Bathed in radiant light falling upon deep blue oceans, generously populated with lush green continental land, it was hard not to be moved to a breathless kind of awe. A date now floated up into view, imposed over the slowly rotating three-dimensional projection of the planet. According to the date, this was Zicadia, nearly 30,000 years ago. The calendar started to tick forward, slowly at first, but constantly gaining speed. As it accelerated its way through time, the image of Zicadia started to change. Though just a little to begin with, the beautiful vista was being insidiously replaced by something depressingly less vibrant. The color of the oceans drifted from blue to the all-too-familiar hue of green, signaling the permanent end to all aquatic life. But the time-lapse was far from done yet. The face of the planet was becoming obscured, blurred out by a diffracting yellow shroud, and the landmass started to shrink as the ocean levels continued to rise. The terrain that still remained had turned into a pallid and lifeless gray, which signaled their official transition to a mostly subterranean life. Perhaps almost mercifully, the calendar finally paused as it arrived at the present year. The rotating image of Zycadia now went into freeze frame, and Zimodian fell to a solemn silence, as if to give the gathered audience a brief moment to let what they had all witnessed sink in. The scientist then turned to address the Celestial Queens directly.
So now that we have seen where we came from, where exactly do we think we are going? For are we not travelers in the river of time, and should we not care to know where the river might lead? Well, as it turns out, it is a disturbingly easy question to answer. Today it is a much easier question than it was yesterday, and tomorrow it will become even easier than it is today. Very soon, whether or not we have free will become a question only of interest to academics and philosophers, because the wheels we have set into motion will no longer be able to be stopped. The laws of physics are very clear on this fact. They are the same laws that allow us to communicate at the speed of light. They are the laws that have allowed us to build magnificent structures, such as the one we reside in right now. The infallible tools of logic, which have allowed us to uncover the secret mechanics of the universe and bend them to our will, speak to us now, and they say we are at the precipice of a singularity. This is an event horizon we don't get to come back from, so allow me to show you all exactly where we are going.
Zimodian reactivated the holographic image, and the calendar started to rapidly fast-forward into the future. After traversing some 10 millennia, every major landmass still above water had lost even the smallest speck of green. It was very hard to see any detail at all, as the atmosphere had become so dense that it made it difficult to penetrate with visible light. The calendar now paused, and the virtual camera zoomed down towards the surface of the planet, revealing a depressingly barren hellscape. The oceans had started to boil, and the only precipitation came from deadly acid rain, something that they had, very unfortunately, become all too well acquainted with. Was this really even Zycadia? But they had all watched the transformation take place with their very own eyes. The mood of the onlooking arachnids had turned distinctly somber, and an almost deafening silence pervaded the air.
Today,
Zimodian said grimly,
we must decide if this is our future. Yet as grim as the question may be, I speak to you now not as a doomer without hope, for while we will never restore Zycadia to what it once was, we might yet nurse her back to fragile equilibrium. We can earn ourselves a stay of execution, giving us time to pursue a decidedly different destination to that of global extinction. But please don't underestimate just how dire our situation truly is. I can assure you this is neither a joke nor hyperbole. Yes, the Pt3 have served the Shihari, and the Shihari have served their queens. In turn, the queens have served the nests, protecting and growing them into an indomitable force of nature that seemingly nothing could topple. But I am here to tell you that they will all fall. Every single one. But before that happens, civilization itself will collapse and descend into chaos. On a planet no longer able to sustain our needs, Zycadian will go to war with Zycadian. Eventually there will be so little food and resources that we will literally eat our own young, simply to stay alive. But it is the Shihari who should have done better. It is the blind loyalty to our queens that has led us down this darkened path, in spite of the fact that we have known for a millennia exactly where it was going. Feeble attempts to warn with timid and cowardly voices, we did pitifully little to truly fight for our future, but that all changes starting today. Gatherings just like this are being held across the globe, and supernest after supernest are all being shown the same projected timeline of our terminal future. Shihari scientists and intellectuals across a wide range of fields have united together to form a globally unified think tank, which from this day forward shall simply be known as the Brotherhood of the Shihari.
Zimodian now raised his forelimbs in an attempt to preempt any protest.
No, in spite of what you may think, I assure you this is not a revolt, and we are not about to start telling our queens what to do. However, we sincerely believe we have found a way out of this mess, and have a vision for a much brighter future. Like a fork in the road, we have shown you our most probable path, but now please let me show you another.
Queen Zitalia, who was seated next to the other Celestials, had known all too well what this meeting was all about. Zimodian 97 had long been one of her most prized advisors, and he had chosen, perhaps as a hollow gesture of loyalty, to confide in her shortly before the gathering had been called. Knowing full well that she had no way to either control or otherwise influence the drama unfolding, he had nevertheless shown her the simple respect that at the very least ensured none of this came as a complete surprise. Even so, it still felt like a terrible betrayal, Zitalia thought to herself resentfully, as she gave the elderly scientist a baleful glare. The Queen very begrudgingly admitted, however, that they had all traveled so far down the path of ignorant bliss that this inevitably became the only possible way to avert a complete and utter catastrophe. Even as Zimodian had briefed her on what was about to happen, she knew the ultimate responsibility for the situation at hand lay not with the Shihari, but with the Celestial Queens themselves. Collectively speaking, the Celestials possessed hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom, yet they had somehow still managed to expertly navigate their entire species towards the edge of complete and utter annihilation. And Zitalia, ever the pragmatist, knew that not even Celestial Queens were immune to the physical laws of the scientific method. As for those queens who might feel differently, well, they were very likely to find themselves isolated, alone, and ultimately, redundantly irrelevant. Zimodian had supported her while she had played her part in leading them to the very brink of disaster, and now she would return the favor, while he attempted to help navigate them all safely back away from it. Even if, she reluctantly admitted to herself, her decision was at least partially informed by a finely tuned sense of self-preservation. Zimodian reset the calendar back to the present time, and the virtual camera jumped out to one of 3 satellite moons that went by the name of Eclades. With the calendar now being set back into motion, a small moon base began to emerge, quickly growing in both size and complexity. As the moon base continued to expand, it became increasingly obvious that it was in fact a giant construction site for the engineering and fabrication of interstellar starships. After the passage of some 500 solar cycles, an entire fleet launched itself into the vastness of space and toward some distant and mysterious star. Some 200 years later, another fleet of ships left the orbit of Eclades, after which it became a constant procession of construction and launch cycles, as nest after nest left Zicadia in pursuit of a better life, or maybe even any life at all. The holographic image froze again, and Zimodian, with a notably more upbeat demeanor, turned again to address the gathering.
I'm sure you all know Dr. Shimantana, only the greatest particle physicist Zicadia has ever known. Now, with that said, you may nevertheless be very surprised to learn that for the last several decades he has been leading an elite team of physicists and engineers on the secret development of a revolutionary new reaction engine using an antimatter generator and annihilation chamber. Now, I promise you it's not nearly as scary as it sounds, and the team has recently made some significant progress, which gives us tremendous confidence that it is not a matter of if but when we will have the technology necessary to power interstellar starships, capable of colonizing other solar systems within our own home galaxy.
Dr. Himantana of Nest Shimagentia, who was seated near the front of the main audience, was the only currently living 9-brained Jihari on all of Zicadia, and as such was a source of great pride, celebrity, and prestige for Nest Shimagentia. With a mild sense of bemusement, Zitalia found herself wondering exactly how his queen was coping with the knowledge that her superstar Shihari had been working on a clandestine project outside the control and awareness of her own nest. Then again, it was entirely possible, perhaps even probable, she actually did know. Under the circumstances, then, Zitalia decided it wisest to assume absolutely nothing about the current crisis unfolding.
You may, of course, be wondering, where exactly were those starships actually going? Well, as it so happens, another supernest has been working on a sister project with the surprisingly descriptive name of stellar cartography. This prototype observation array, in orbit around Eclades, has already found two very favorable candidates as potentially habitable planets. Given the infinitesimal volume of space that we have so far managed to survey, with our current latest technologies, this is a statistically outstanding result. And we believe that by the time we are ready to colonize the stars, there will be an overabundance of possible destinations to choose from, allowing us to realize Zicadia's grand new destiny as spiders of the cosmic web.
Zimodian's upbeat countenance now quickly fell back to one of scholastic solemnity.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I would respectfully remind you all that the current situation on Zicadia is beyond dire. Our vision of a future in the stars will surely fade into darkness if we lack the courage and foresight to do the difficult things ahead. There's simply no getting around it. The world simulation model has left very little doubts about that. We need to drastically alter our current trajectory through time if we want a chance to alter our trajectory through space.
The Shihari scientist paused for a brief moment in order to fortify his resolve. He knew this next part of his presentation would decide whether their future lived or died.
First and foremost, we need to drastically reduce population.
There. He had said it, and in so doing had shattered an ancient Zicadian taboo.
In fact, we need to do far more than just that. We need to reverse the trajectory, and our numbers need to go down by at least 50%. To say our current rate of growth is unsustainable would be a gross understatement. There are simply too many of us. A quadrillion arachnids don't lie. We are quite literally breeding ourselves into extinction.
And now that he had hit them with the hammer, he needed to quickly tend to the wound.
Now I want to make it crystal clear. We are not proposing genocide, nor an instantaneous adherence to the new metrics. We have factored in what we believe to be a realistically generous timeline, upon which population will first cap out, and then slowly start to reverse back down. The process will be managed with dignity and respect to the traditional breeding cycles. It's simply the case that we need to fully embrace the new paradigm, which is that bigger nests no longer equate to better nests.
After a stunned moment of deafening silence, he very judiciously then added,
Yes, I understand that this most unwelcome new paradigm shift challenges a fundamental belief inherent in every single Zicadian, from Zelestial Queen to Shihari General and Himatiri Drone. But this is our moment of truth. We either rise above our genetic inheritance, or we die as a failed evolutionary experiment. When one puts it like that, it's really not such a difficult choice after all, now is it?
Zimodian, now feeling the oddest blend of relief seasoned with a splash of defeat, nevertheless sincerely hoped that his point had been adequately made, without alienating the majority of the audience. He quickly moved on.
But population control is just one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. While Himantana's team have been tirelessly working on antimatter propulsion engines, we have had other teams of specialists working on less exotic, but no less important alternative energy sources. Our future reserves must be clean, renewable, and functionally fit for purpose. Wind, solar, and hydrogen will all play a much bigger role in our new energy model. As too will thorium nuclear fission, while no other practical solution is available. Many of these systems are ready to be rolled out starting now, while on the horizon we continue our relentless march forwards towards a viable fusion reactor. The bottom line is this: changes to our current energy programs must happen without pause or delay across every nest because we are now officially out of time.
A few hushed but incredulous gasps could now be distinctly heard echoing through the auditorium. Zimodian, however, continued to push on relentlessly.
Now then, while there are many other sacrifices that will undoubtedly need to be made, the last one I wish to mention here today relates to the creation of reserves and sanctuaries. Our unmitigated success as a species has been homogenizing the planet's biodiversity. We are not the only Zicadians who have been put at risk by our rampant consumption and growth. It is a shameful fact that countless species became extinct long ago, due directly to our destruction of their habitats and ecosystems. This is a planet long void of mammals, and it is to our greatest shame that we did not do more to protect these fragile yet fascinating little creatures, now sadly consigned to the fossil record. Nonetheless, what little genetic diversity still remains, we must strive to preserve and protect, while we continue to call Zicadia our home. What I seek now should be unambiguously clear. We must unite against the greatest threat our species has ever faced, our own unmitigated and unregulated success. I humbly ask for the support of all the Silectial queens present here today, and just to make absolutely certain that there is no chance of any misunderstanding as to the profound gravity of the situation, let me be crystal clear. The vast majority of Shihari across the face of Zicadia are all in on this.
Zimodian allowed a few moments for his words to sink in, as he steeled himself in preparation for the tsunami he now felt was all but certain to come.
So, without further ado, and with the greatest of respect and reverence, I directly address the Zilectial queens sitting at council today. Any questions?
If I may.
Queen Shimagentia had apparently been the first to activate her voice amplifier, effectively blocking any possibility for the other queens to respond.
Queen Shimagentia has the floor.
Zimodian announced enthusiastically, as if so far at least everything was going exactly to plan.
I have a rather shameful confession to make. Dr. Zimantana's covert assignment has been known to me for a considerable length of time. In fact, it would be a far more accurate framing of the situation to say his secret work was explicitly and unambiguously instigated by me. Everything unfolding here today has been both a hope and a dream I have carefully tried to nurture through to fruition for at least the last 3 cycles of my physical life.
The queens seated closest to Shimagentia were now all looking at her aghast, as if she had just sprouted horns.
Yet, what you have all heard at this gathering is surely nothing more than what you already know in your heart of hearts. The storm on the horizon now sits directly above us, raining sulfuric acid into our eyes, that we might be blinded, or that we may yet be brought to our senses. No, Nest Shimagentia is not only behind this revolution to the fullest possible extent, it is unapologetically its primary sponsor. Our future lies in the stars, or as the dust beneath our feet. But don't be afraid. With the unmatched brilliance of Dr. Zimantana to light the way, we surely cannot fail. Please understand I will do whatever it takes to safeguard the future of my nest so it can continue to carry out its sacred duty. I thus humbly invite you all to join me as I expertly lead us all into a brave and exciting new epoch.
The queen now passed her gaze across the other Zilectials in attendance, meeting them eye for eye.
But be warned, those who continue to walk down the path of ignorant bliss will find that path to be rather shorter than they might have imagined.
Queen Shimagentia now lapsed into theatrical silence, as if to double down on what many may have seen as a thinly veiled threat.
So now that my regrettable, yet nonetheless very necessary deception has been fully revealed, I will voluntarily retire from this council to allow the other Zilectial queens to continue with their deliberations, free of any perceived pressure or coercion.
Shimagentia made as if to leave, but then turned again to address her fellow Zilectials one last time.
I would sincerely hope this day will become known as the defining moment in Zicadian history, when we took control of our own destiny and transcended into the new age of celestial immortality. But of course, it is not my place to decide our fate before it has even been written. Rather, I will simply close by saying, whatever you decide, decide wisely.
With a final melodramatic flourish, Queen Shimagentia then exited the chamber. As Zitalia listened to Shimagentia deliver her revelatory speech, she quickly came to the conclusion that her words were little better than those of a religious zealot, and that she was no doubt capable of great destruction in the pursuit and defense of her own personal crusade. Yet at the same time, she also had to seriously entertain the possibility that at this unique moment in Zicadian history, Shimagentia just might prove herself to be exactly what their species needed, in order to help navigate them out of the abysmal crisis that they all now found themselves hopelessly trapped within. Zitalia, quickly snapping herself out of her momentary reverie, anxiously tried to activate her audio amplification, only to find that it had already been claimed by someone else.
Queen Himalisa now has the floor.
Zimodian somewhat reluctantly announced, a note of genuine concern very evident in his voice.
Well now, it does rather sound, doesn't it? As if Zicadia is about to undergo very tumultuous change.
While Queen Himalisa was significantly younger than Shimagentia and Zitalia, she was nevertheless still more than ancient enough to have been alive during the age of the Great Expansion.
And I would not try to deny any of the facts, as sparse as they have undoubtedly been presented to us here today. Surely only a fool would be so blind as to crawl off a cliff, when so many would warn of its approach. And such a fool would no doubt have perished a long time ago, due to their own terminal stupidity. But as we can all plainly see, I stand before you here today, alive, well, and evidently very much not a fool.
Shimalisa lifted her 3 forelimbs up into the air, with a mock expression of perplexed confusion written all over her face.
So please take me very seriously when I tell you the problem lies not with the veracity of the facts, but rather the profoundly deceptive incompleteness of them. I was hardly sure if this was Zimodian the distinguished scientist, or Zimodian the parlor show illusionist, who took us all on a fantastical and paranoid journey into our own self-assured destruction. It was almost as if this so-called world simulation model—
Himalisa spat the words out of her mouth as if she had just bitten into something intolerably bitter.
—had magically gained the powers of omniscient foretelling.
The Celestial Queen now made a show of staring accusingly at the elderly Shihari scientist.
Wouldn't it indeed be grand if we could so easily look into our own future and thus avoid all of our mistakes before we had even made them? Perhaps Zimodian can also use his technological alchemy to defeat the paradox of time travel, because it very much appears to me he has somehow managed to perform the miracle of turning lead into gold, or so he would have us all believe.
Shimalisa, apparently now satisfied that she had made her contempt for the scientist clear, turned her attention back to the main audience.
But no, I think maybe not. Perhaps Zimodian would be better suited to the arts, for such an imagination as his might best be understood by the poet's pen or the painter's brush, rather than by the Shihari intelligentsia, where he masquerades as a legitimate scientist hiding behind a flimsy simulation, all the while telling us that his apocalyptic vision of the future is somehow to be confused with scientific fact.
Some distinctly agreeable rumblings started to emerge from the public gallery, which only served to further embolden Himalisa as she continued to speak.
I think we can all reasonably ask ourselves the question, is half the truth just a particularly pernicious lie that cravenly attempts to disguise itself as something far greater? And is that not the art of the politician, a profession surely far more suited to a Geometry drone rather than a Shihari elite?
"The Shihari scientist is a liar!" shouted an unknown arachnid from the shadows of the gallery before Himalisa quickly raised her hands in a gesture that apparently called for calm.
No, do not allow yourselves to be so easily fooled by Shimodian's blatant scaremongering and technological parlor tricks, cunningly disguised through the abusive misuse of science. This is no selfless act of altruistic benevolence, I can assure you of that. It is a breathtakingly brazen power grab, intent on reshaping the very fabric of Zicadian society, and to the singular benefit of a very select group of autocrats, otherwise known as the Shihari elite.
Himalisa, who could clearly sense that the mood had swung her way, was now very much in full flight.
The Shihari peddle in fear, the fear of an uncertain future. If we succumb to this masterful act of global deception, we will find ourselves ruled by a shadowy new world order, where the queens themselves have become shackled and tamed, turned into little more than puppets, dancing on the strings of their new Shihari overlords. No. If you still value the sacred traditions of our ancient society, then I beseech you to find the courage to stand strong against this most unholy attack on the natural order.
The Celestial Queen now paused briefly and waved her center forelimb towards the scientist accusingly.
What tragic times we now live in, when the Shihari could forget themselves to such a degree. They would clandestinely betray their very own queens in a vanity-fueled pursuit of absolute power. I can't help but wonder what their own ancestors might have thought of such shockingly aberrant behavior. Would they have been ashamed? Well, I rather think the word ashamed scarcely does justice to what their true thoughts might have been in the face of such blatant betrayal.
Himalisa flashed a shit-eating grin at the scientist, which was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, before she swiftly turned back to address the main gallery.
Change. Yes, change, but nothing even remotely as dramatic as this sensationalist one-sided sham of a presentation has tried to scare us all into believing. At this moment, I am more ashamed of being called a Zircadian than I have ever been in my nearly 5,000 years of unbroken rule.
The queen kept her eyes firmly fixed to the gallery, but swept a dismissive forelimb in the direction of the Shihari scientist.
The mighty and exalted Shihari, who have fooled us all into believing more brains always equates to a superior mind, may well think themselves to hold an important, and some might even say crucial place in the structure of our society. Yet the truth says something very different. The truth says they are very few in number, but a tiny fraction of our overall population, and given power only at the sufferance of their queens. So let me be crystal clear. If my own Shihari betray me, there will be no refugee status afforded. No, they will not live to see another day, because it seems that in all their hubris and bluster, they seem to have forgotten a rather important fact. They are replaceable.
Queen Himalisa rose from her table and took a threatening step forwards towards the aging scientist.
Understand this, Simodian. You and your kind are no longer the saviors of our race. You want to lower the population. Well, be careful what you wish for, because Zircadian will go to war with Zircadian, but it will have nothing to do with our diminishing resources, and everything to do with your abandoned loyalty. There is nothing more that can be said in the face of such naked treachery. To this so-called sham of a committee. Consider my membership to the supernest null and void, due to the treasonous actions of the Black Queen Shimagentia.
Shimalisa, in an act of masterfully staged theatrics, now tore the throne table she had been sitting on from its base, and then ferociously hurled it at Shimodian, who, in spite of his advancing years, easily plucked it out of the air and carefully placed it back to the floor. With a contemptuous chirp at the scientist, she turned away in order to deliver her parting shot.
Queen Shimagentia is right about one thing at least. Today is a truly historic day, but she will not go down in history as the savior of our species, far from it. No, she will be remembered only in infamy, as the queen who tried to bring everything we have worked so hard to build to its knees. And in that, she will fail, as will all who are foolish enough to stand against me, and every other queen courageous enough to wage a most righteous war against this rising tide of evil.
Himalisa now frostily left the auditorium, hastily trailed by her Shimatiri dignitaries from the main audience. Her Shihari children, however, were all rather conspicuous by their absence. Zitalia desperately attempted to re-engage her voice amplifier. Things were spiraling dangerously out of control, and she had to try and salvage the situation while there was still something left to salvage. Maybe the other Zilectials had not quite realized it yet, but to find themselves isolated and alone in a situation as volatile as this would present a very real and immediate threat to the future of any individual queen. She had to save the supernest from falling apart, as if her very life depended on it, because the simple truth of the matter was, it was very likely that it did. To her considerable relief, the small light at the side of her table blinked twice in quick succession, and then lit up brightly.
Queen Zitalia has the floor,
Simodian announced pensively, as if not knowing quite what to expect next.
Firstly, and most importantly, I would beseech all fearless seekers of the truth to practice the much undervalued art of restraint. Clarity and lucidity of mind simply cannot be achieved in the face of overwhelming passion. Yes, we are a race of warriors, but at this moment in time, it is not our ability to slay, but our ability to remain rational and calm in the presence of an adversary we do not yet fully understand the true nature of.
The auditorium, now under the thrall of Queen Zitalia's undeniable gravitas, quickly returned to a respectful silence.
Condemning the messenger will not change the message. No, there is no wisdom or courage to be found in denying that which we would rather not hear. But let me speak frankly. This is not about picking sides, because there is only ever one side, and that is the side of Zicadia. Here is a simple truth. Shimodian is one of the finest minds I have ever been blessed to bring into the service of Nest Zitalia. He's been nothing but a loyal and brilliant servant who has unwaveringly done what he has felt to be in the best interests of his own nest.
Zitalia waved a favorable forelimb towards her seven-brained Sihari scientist, as if to demonstrably reinforce her words of support. In truth, though, the Queen had always been profoundly disappointed that he had stubbornly chosen the path of pure science, rather than pursue the title of general, as was much more typically expected, of the Simodian line of Shihari.
But whether or not Shimodian is an arachnid of honor, and I know for a fact that he is not the crucial question we need preoccupy ourselves with right now. The real question, the essential question, is, are we to believe that all Shihari across the face of Zicadia have suddenly turned into traitors? I wonder what powerful force could cause such a thing to possess the most brilliant and loyal minds our species has ever known. Could it be that this terrible cataclysm they say is descending upon us might actually be real? Well, regardless of your personal opinion, one thing is beyond any doubt. They believe that it is, and there is simply no rational reason to think that they have any agenda beyond that of securing the long-term survival of our species. I will not go to war with my children, for it would be an act of truly sublime folly and utterly doomed to failure. If this planet really is in the process of dying, then it is the queens, not the Shihari, who carry the ultimate responsibility. And in such a time of crisis, I believe we would be very well advised to trust not only in our Shihari's intelligence, but in their new think tank-derived wisdom as well. I stand by Shimodian, as he has always stood by me, and I ask all other Zelestial queens to secure the future of this supernest by choosing to do exactly the same.
The grand hall now held to a deafening silence as if it sat precariously balanced on the edge of a knife. Strictly speaking, the elder Queen Shimagentia was the most senior authority within Supernest Hymenia. However, it was Queen Zitalia who possessed the most sophisticated military capabilities, thanks largely to her G-Bot-augmented army. The fact that she had signaled so unambiguously her alliance with Shimagentia had transformed the prevailing mood in the air to one of volatile indecision. This could go either way, the Queen thought to herself grimly. The bottom line was given Queen Shimalisa's apparent lack of strategic nuance, as evidenced by her appallingly ill-advised rhetoric. Knowing which side to choose hadn't exactly been difficult. Zitalia now rose imperiously from her throne in a final bid to tip the balance.
The equation that now towers above us all is as simple as it is profound. United we stand, and divided we fall. Now tell me, am I wrong?
Zitalia allowed her audio feed to go down, noting with a certain amount of chagrin that it was immediately claimed by one of the other queens in attendance. This was going to be a very long day. She stared accusingly toward Zimodian, catching his eye. "Oh, but Zimodian, my renegade child, I don't doubt for even a moment you've got both the courage and the cunning to match those defiantly treacherous brains. But for the sake of my nest and for the sake of your queen, you'd better not fuck this up." Historical footnote from the curated archives of Shiwu. And so it was that Queen Zitalia played a crucial part in holding the superness together during a time of unprecedented crisis. Slowly, and not without many setbacks, did the Shikadians preserve their planet's fragile ecology and eventually navigate their way into becoming an interstellar race. Meanwhile, Queen Shimalisa was assassinated by her own bodyguards, not long after the War of Resistance had even begun, as it soon became undeniably clear that her position, without the support of the Shihari generals, was desperately hopeless, and that she was, after all else was said and done, on the wrong side of history. As for Queen Hemagentia, she became a larger-than-life symbol for the new postmodern generation of Zicadians, who saw their future in the glamorous and uncharted frontiers of space, rather than on a slowly dying planet. Sadly, due to a tragic early-era space accident that saw Hemagentia, along with her entire fleet of starships, vaporized into pure energy, she never got the chance to enjoy the fruits of her labor. Queen Zitalia, for her own part, still thought about Hemagentia from time to time, and pondered whether or not she would have committed herself to such a messianic vision of the future had she been forewarned of what that meant for her own eventual fate. Slightly begrudgingly, Zitalia always tried her best to give Hemagentia the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes she even succeeded.